Welcome. You are listening to the Overseas Life Redesign podcast, where you'll hear fun, relaxed, and inspirational interviews with people who are really living the dream. I'm Dawn Fleming, an attorney turned alchemist, and your host for the show, coming to you from the tropical island paradise of Isla Mujeres, Mexico. Listen to conversations with courageous souls who've stepped out of their comfort zone and designed a new way of life. They'll share their experiences, wisdom, and offer practical steps you can take to redesign your life overseas. Listen and you'll believe. If you can dream it, you can achieve it.
I am here this afternoon with Cliff Holmes. We met through Facebook, part of the Live and Earn in Paradise group, and he just happened to be visiting our island paradise of Isla Mujeres, and so I convinced him to sit down for an interview. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me this afternoon.
Thank you, Don. I'm so happy. And your view out the window is like, it is paradise. It isn't like paradise. It is paradise.
It is. It really doesn't get old. It's a lovely view, and I'm glad you're facing that direction.
Me too.
Anyway, so you are from Missouri, and
Yes.
we had a chance to talk the other day, pool patio happy hour get together. So really amazing story, and that's why I grabbed him for this interview. I really wanted to have him talk about some of his experiences. But CPA background professionally, but grew up on a farm. You want to tell me how that came about?
Okay. I was born at 6:30 in the morning. Okay. I won't go quite that far back. Yeah. Well, I was raised on a farm, a dairy farm. I left the farm very early, at 17 years old, and started university. Graduated with a degree in accounting. And there's a lot of time in between there, but I'm sure we have limited time, so I'll try not to regress with the real boring stuff. I only worked in the accounting world until I was 39 years old. And consequently, and simultaneously during my college years, I think it was my second semester in college, I started reading a lot, and I was already interested in it before I started reading a lot about real estate investing. But it kind of clicked for me early on, which is really unusual. But I was kind of an entrepreneur. I mean, I was the 6-year-old boy that went through the countryside looking for pennies and nickels and quarters from our neighbors of what could I do? What can you pay me? What can you pay me? Of course, when you're a little boy, and you're an entrepreneurial spirit, you realize you can smile really good, and then everybody's going to give you at least a quarter for doing much of anything, and it stuck. So I was always creating jobs for myself in the community where I was raised, very rural Missouri. There was 28 kids in my graduating class. It was a very small school, very small town. During my college years, I realized there was a big world out there off the farm, and the opportunities to me were enormous, unlimited. So I just went for it, and I started buying one at a time and turning some of them into rentals. Even some of my houses that I owned, I would own them for a while, then I would rent them out for a while, go to the next home. And during that same period of time, of course, after graduation, I went to work for the firm. And at 39, I was actually making more money out of the firm than I was as a partner in the firm. So I said, goodbye, guys, I'm going. And I was going to retire. Well, I was talking to Don about that recently, and we won't go deeply into that. It didn't work for me to retire at 39. I still had some properties, but nothing like what I had when I finally did retire a few years ago. I never hardly ever use that word retire, because I do not like that word retire. I'm not really retired. I manage my portfolio online with an iPhone. That's my office, and it's maybe 5 hours a week of any kind of work whatsoever, and it's really not work. With crypto and equities, it's life has been really interesting in that world. Leaving the firm and leaving real estate. I don't know, Don, if you want me to go into my very specific properties.
Well, I'm just a little curious. So was this something you weren't raised with this way of being this entrepreneurial spirit that you
well,
have?
we were on a farm. So
okay.
my mom and dad had when I was real little, had a little bitty farm, and they grew it to a larger farm. So we were a substantial farm by the time I left for college. But a farm is a business.
Sure.
It is basically an entrepreneurial. I come from an entrepreneurial family. They didn't manufacture shoes and
Sure.
sell groceries, but it was a farm business. So I guess that had a lot to do with it. And then my grandparents also were entrepreneurs and business owners as well, but mostly agriculture, very, very small. And I remember when I was like 12 years old, my grandfather had retired from his farm. He was like in his early 70s, okay? And he was in Oklahoma, and we used to visit them. And I remember it made an impression on me because my grandfather was in Shawnee, Oklahoma, where he actually lived till his death. But he had sold his farm and bought this 2 or 3 story house. It was, this is back in the 70s, so this old house probably could have been built before the turn of the century. It was really old, and it was multi-level. And he was a single guy then, and grandmother died, and then so he had different people living on these different levels as renters. And that was really, I'm like 10 or 12 years old, and I'm thinking, wow, Grandpa's making money off these people. So those kind of things stuck with me. I wasn't just there to play and have a good time, or I was, but I'm thinking about those things at a very young age. Right. So that's some of my, when I first started realizing the world there's more out there than just getting a job, getting a paycheck. Because I was at a young age, I started realizing there was I wouldn't want to say category of people, but I started to recognize the difference of wealth in people. There were people and we didn't when I was a kid, but I saw people that vacationed every single year. There was people that I knew that holidayed multiple times of the year. And I knew you didn't do that unless you had something going for you. There had to be money coming from somewhere. So I guess I realized with a little bit of ingenuity, maybe I could be some of those people that actually got the holiday more than once in a lifetime. And of course now I holiday every day.
All the time, right. I know, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So the other thing I want to ask you about is you told me about the book that you wrote and the influence you've had in the farming industry and, seeing different tax returns from different people and seeing what you want to talk about that a little bit?
That's a really big topic. We need 3 more days. Okay. Okay. Well, so because I did mention that I was raised on a farm, and when I left the farm, I actually told Don this, is I'm never going to be around a milk cow the rest of my life. Well, that didn't work very well because I realized just very shortly after that once I wasn't being forced to do things on the farm, I actually liked the farm. If I could have it my way, okay? And that's one of those things about being an entrepreneur. Is, the entrepreneur spirit isn't, in my opinion, it isn't even primarily about making a lot of money. Definitely not priority. It is about independence, and definitely wealth brings independence. But I think that I would. That's why one of the reasons I quit working for somebody else when I was 39 years old. I wanted that independence, but that wealth come along with that, and I knew that I could have more freedom, and it just so happened that wealth come with that if I could spread myself out. And I told something to Don. I think it was Don. I mentioned this about Warren Buffett, one of my old-time heroes. Warren Buffett was in a small business himself also until he was like 58 or 59 years old. One small business, and it was successful, but it wasn't large. And at a fairly late period of time in his life, which now really is not, to me, is not that late, he realized he sold his business and started investing in the equities in a lot of different businesses. And now he's known for repeating this very famous statement that he says, it's much more profitable to own little pieces of a lot of different businesses than it is even owning your own one business. And that's kind of how I developed my real estate. I really wasn't interested in buying and owning and building an empire of 30, 40, 50-story buildings and having my name on the outside. I wanted a lot of little pieces of real estate And I think I really understood the aspects and the benefit of diversity. You know, if you happen to buy, if you had, and that's that old cliche about having all your eggs in one basket. If you put all your money in one unit, and that something happens unforeseen, you're sunk and you're starting over again. So I started buying small properties, and I never really bought very many large properties. I even, like Dawn mentioned about the agriculture life that I had. My agricultural life it never really stopped except a year or two when I was in college, because then I started buying farm land, small pieces, 40 acres, 80 acres, 107 acres, 500 acres, and then they kept growing and growing. Then I put several pieces together to a large ranch. That I don't like using the word expertise, but my experience in, even when I was a child, had a huge influence. Because remember, it's not all about money, even though building wealth is very beneficial, and it's a worthwhile project. I don't want to minimize that, but doing something that you really like, and I really liked discussing and building upon and learning more about techniques. And I thought I saw as a kid that we were doing a lot of things that could have been done better farming. So when I started buying farms and putting them together, slowly my mind started creating these ideas that were definitely not orthodox farming practices. And then I met somebody very, very important, that became very, very important to me, a South African man by the name of Alan Savory. And he actually created the concept. He didn't create it, but he expanded on it, the term that he calls holistic management. And that was probably close to 30 years ago when I first met. I didn't meet him 30 years ago. I met him quite a few years later, but I was introduced to him and some of his mentors, actually. And that kind of progressed on my own farm over about a 30-year period. And somewhere along about that 10-year period, I began meeting people that were interested in what I was doing in the agricultural world and doing it financially well. And they were saying, how can you do this? And I was a pretty young man at that time, because typically farming now is truly a multi-million-dollar business, even when you're considered a small farmer. And how was this guy at that young age being able to do that? Well, I'm going to give most of the credit to holistic management. And then I started being asked to write articles in agricultural periodicals, and I got that. It wasn't a full-time job, but it got to the point where it felt like a full-time job. I think I was at one point writing for 4 a month. I mean, it's four articles in four different magazines every single month, and then it started being online. And then one of those publications is still today. It's Acres USA is actually is a publishing company. It's recently sold to new owners, but with the prior owners, I was writing for their magazine, and then they asked me to write if I would consider writing a book. So I wrote the book, and the book's now on market for Amazon, on Amazon.com. It's called Ranching Full-Time on 3 Hours a Day, which is truly a silly name, but it's what it means. And you can, obviously, because I was doing it, making a good living on a farm, working 3 hours a day, using holistic management. In a nutshell, that's what probably the pinnacle of my agricultural world. And then when I decided to so-called retire, that ranch was a substantial piece of property that also was part of my real estate portfolio, and it went also. It's sold. Everything's sold. Mm-hmm. That might be your next question. I don't know.
No, that's great. So it sounds like you came across these ideas and started implementing them gradually.
And not gradually, I'd say, because I never did anything gradually. I was all in all the time.
Okay, that's great.
And there's a couple of topics we won't go too deep into, because I am the quintessential workaholic. There's no question about it. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I knew that when I decided I wanted to change a lifestyle change, I knew I had to completely get out of all my businesses 100%. Just like when I thought I could retire at 39, I only had a few pieces of property, and the next thing you know, at 39, by the time I was 40, 41, I was way, 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 way over my head again, and just keep going and going, and it didn't stop until I said, okay, I'm done. And that's that idea of having to work 24/7. I don't recommend that to anybody. And in this conversation that we're having now, that may be seem like a casual part of the conversation. But what I guess one point that I would like to make, and I didn't ask Dawn if I could do this, but I would suggest that we do our careers and our wealth building, because I know it can be done, on a more guided trajectory than what I had. Meaning you don't have to go in 24/7, 7 days a week for 40 years nonstop. It's not necessary. I have a personality and a character that tends to go way overboard all the time. I have no stop. And it took me a long time until I realized that's what character I had. In fact, until I sold everything, or got to the point where I knew I needed to sell everything, I thought I was living a casual life. There was absolutely nothing casual about my existence. It was go, 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 go. And I want to make sure, if I say anything of value, that that's not a requirement to build wealth. It can be
Good
done.
point.
It can be done.
That's a great point. And we did talk about that the other evening, and I did want to kind of bring that up because it's easy, and I know I've been guilty of that before, attorney and being in that environment and working with partners that have no life and that 16, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then the divorce and 3 small children that told them that they hated them on a regular basis, and working in that environment is not is not pleasant. And it's certainly, it's like, oh, you don't want to make partner? No, thank you. I don't want to be you, right? When I grew up. And so having that balance in there is funny. Just today I was kind of talking about the difference between endurance and resilience. And, the endurance, running a marathon and leaving it all in the field. And that's okay to do in short bursts, right? But it's not necessarily a good way to live your life, right? You will burn yourself out.
No,
and I think you have to recharge your batteries. I
agree.
And you kind of learned that the hard way, I guess, based on what we said. So you had said that you told me about the moment when everything changed for you, which wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it was a shock. When you want to talk about that a little bit?
Are you talking about marriages?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have to talk about that? Okay, yeah. Okay, no, I'm okay talking about it. I probably wouldn't have been 5 years ago, but yeah. And that is one of the conversations that Dawn and I had. It is still very challenging for me to talk about it because I know that I made huge mistakes in my personal life that I didn't know. And you think, well, how did you not know you were working 24/7 for 40 years? I thought she was taking care of everything else, and I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. I don't want to blame it on anybody. I don't want to say, well, that's how I was raised or things like that. It was completely, I was oblivious to it.
It's just your MO, right?
I didn't,
that's just the way you operated.
And so the last 20 or so years, my life was, I'm flying here, flying there. I'm doing this presentation. I'm doing this book signing. I'm doing this presentation. In addition to all my rental properties and my agriculture projects and everything, it was, and I never felt overworked. And that's the crazy thing. I was still grabbing more stuff. At one point in time, it's been over 25 years now. We started a small food company, an organic food company that grew to a pretty good sized food company and became quite profitable. Well, that was probably, and my now ex-wife was very involved in that. And I thought that she was pretty happy with that while I was, doing this and doing that. And what I realized afterwards, I was not knowingly, I expected too much from everybody else because I had no limitations on myself. And now I can think back when I came home from one of those presentations, being gone for a couple of days, and she's gone, and so was the insides of my house, the interior of my house. I sit there and I walk through an empty house, and then I looked over at the countertop in the kitchen, and there was a piece of paper. So I walked over and I picked it up. It was a Dear John letter. Okay, bye. She's saying bye. And I won't comment on whether that was a good way to leave or a bad way to leave. It's what she chose. And that's the reality that hit me. Oh, and she spoke a little bit about why, not a lot, but enough that it got me to thinking about something that I hadn't even crossed my mind. And I didn't sleep for the next 2 or 3 days thinking, what the heck am I going to do? And I didn't know what to do. For the next 3 years, I walked around in that house trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. I was like, I obviously loved my wife a whole lot. And I liked being married. I do like family life. It probably didn't appear to her like I did, obviously. Okay, so I was oblivious. And it was all my fault. And I took all the blame. So it took about 3 years for me to realize I'm an addict. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm a workaholic. And I've been that way my whole life, because that was not my first ex. She's not my first ex-wife. So I learned. It took me 3 years, believe it or not, of wandering around. And during that 3 years, I actually started selling. I sold the food business, and I started selling some things that needed my attention, because I psychologically knew I wasn't myself. So I had to start paring some things back a little bit. I didn't want to just lose them. I started doing it a responsible way, I guess you would say. I didn't sell a lot of property, but some of those things that were requiring my attention 24/7.
Made some adjustments.
Yeah, I did, and I thought, well, it's kind of nice not having as much responsibility. When this thing sold and another thing sold, and then said, oh, I see. And I went back, and I still have that letter, that Dear John letter. So I kept reading it and kind of filling in the blanks, and said, oh, I'm a nutcase. I'm just a nutcase. I just like to work. And I was, I guess I was 57 at the time, 58, something like that. And not really retirement age, but I didn't need any money. I had more money than I would ever spend, which was wrapped up mostly in real estate at that time, but it could be easily liquidated. And and one thing we left out, I had actually started investing in equities in college also, so I had equities too. I didn't have to all of a sudden learn how to make a living at a new stage in my life just because I was approaching retirement. I realized all I had to do is start selling property and move that money into equities, which I did. And now with cryptocurrencies, by the way, I love cryptocurrencies. Okay. But anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. I'm rambling.
You did. So. No, that's okay. So, but then you were talking about making the shift, and did you get addicted to getting rid of stuff?
Oh, no. No.
Because you kind of went the other direction and said,
okay. Let me back up just a little bit. And I don't want to do is get into a lot of personal aspects, because I'm not a marriage counselor.
Sure.
Okay. The only thing I know is I created my own problems in my marriage. Okay. And I'm never
good for you for taking responsibility
it was
for
all
it, because
mine. It was all mine. 100%. She's a good woman. So once I realized I was an addict, it wasn't the type of business. It wasn't the real estate. It wasn't because I had agricultural lands. It wasn't because I owned a ranch, or because I had a food company, or because I'm an author. That wasn't the cause. The reasons is all me, because I did not have control over it. I had no brakes. There's no stop on me. So I knew that over that 3-year period of just kind of wandering around on the ranch, I realized I want something different. I'm not ready at 3 years, I'm not ready. Even today, I'm not ready for a relationship, because I am not going to put another woman through that. But if I ever could think that I could receive another relationship in a good manner, I have to change my ways. And the only way I know this, and I knew that then at the end of the 3 years, I knew the only way I could change my ways if I'm not connected to any kind of business whatsoever. And even today, and I was showing Don a while ago, even this is my office, and I limit myself to 5 hours a week. All I'm doing is monitoring mostly my investments, which are all digital investments, nothing hard, no real estate. And I've had opportunities, and opportunities keep coming to me because that's the world I live in. So I have to have a strong back and say no, absolutely not, because I know what will happen. Just like
taking that first drink.
That first drink, it will not stop. And there's a whole lot of financial and economic details that we've skipped over real fast that when I started selling properties, it gave me more opportunities for more properties. And it was so tempting to take that drink. I mean, it's if someone's never been an addict of any kind, I don't think it's going to be probably a challenge for someone to understand the workaholic addict. But it is someone that has been an addict. They know what I'm talking about, and it's a real thing. And maybe I was over the top even in that category, I think. And I laugh about it, but it's not. It's because time has passed now.
Sure.
But it was no laughing matter five years ago. No.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about the fact that you actually ended up making some really good decisions by not reinvesting in the commercial real estate arena that you later saw. Ooh, I'm glad I didn't do that.
Yeah, and Don's quite familiar with some of it, and me being an old, wore-out tax guy, I didn't want to pay taxes on a lot of property that I sold, and we won't have to go into the details of it, but there's some loopholes in the tax code that lets you forego your capital gains tax if you basically stay in the business in one way or the other. And I am, being an entrepreneur, one of the things that we probably have in common is we want to pay as little amount of tax as possible, but we will not commit tax fraud. Most of us will not anyway, so I wasn't going to do that. So I didn't want to pay those taxes when I wound up selling, especially of the really big property. And I actually looked at a lot of properties to reinvest in. And I had conversations with some of the people that I was having these kind of frank conversations with. And there was one individual that brought to my attention, Cliff, what are you doing? You're going to do it again. And she was right. Oh my gosh, she was right. So I said no. And I paid the taxes. Put the balance in equities and in cryptos, and I never looked back. And I will say one thing, I've always been from economic standpoint, I think, because I've never been the sharpest fence post on the ranch. I will never claim to be the sharpest knife in the drawer. I am a very lucky man. I am lucky. And so all this happened prior to COVID year 2020. And even though a lot of people suffered and still are suffering financially from COVID, those of us that invested in certain areas like I did in the tech world, we hit home runs all 2020. I am lucky. The taxes that I was talking about didn't want to pay. I made those back 3 or 4 times. Right. So and sometimes I think that, and I don't want to say it in my place because I'm not a sharp guy. I am lucky. But I forget who it was that said it, maybe Einstein, maybe, or Abraham Lincoln, one of those guys said something about being lucky there's a big correlation between being lucky and hard work.
Absolutely.
And I think it is that I can't quote it. I forget what it goes. Something about wearing overalls. Hard work or luck gets confused with hard work because it comes dressed in overalls and work boots. And I think, man,
right.
And that was me, definitely. So that's where, if I had luck, that's where it came from. That COVID, I don't know what happened in COVID. I didn't think about the COVID coming, obviously, when I started investing. And I'm not the only one whose our equities did really well. But, but I didn't just sit on the money either. I did a lot of research. Right. I researched for a long, long time. And I still research, and you never stop. Whatever your business is, you can't really stop. You got to keep going.
The constant learning.
Yes, because things are constantly changing. Things change every single day. Nothing is the same tomorrow. If you think it's the same tomorrow, you missed something. You didn't catch it. It is changing. So but I don't manage people anymore. And most of us that have been in business know that as we scale our business, we will manage people. It's next to impossible to have a business of any type that I'm aware of and not manage people. And that really is the hardest part. And that's truly what takes most of the time, managing people. But I don't know if anybody's ever come up with a way to scale a business without having people, except in equities in the markets. And then we can scale up, kind of like what Warren Buffett said. It was better to have a whole lot of little pieces of a lot of different businesses than one. Mm-hmm. It just makes a lot of sense. So,
except the fundamentals are all screwed up right now. But in terms of,
I guess
we can talk about that too. But I had a conversation with Mel, owner of Soggy Peso, a few years ago. It was happening back then. Of course, we saw it in the .com boom, back in 2000. But the correlation between stock price and earnings and all that, it's kind of a scary time to.
And I hear people talking about that, but I also was in business in 1979 through 1981 with 26% interest rates. And all those 40-some years, I saw lots of things. And I don't want anybody to think with this little conversation that we're having here online that I succeeded in every business I had, because
no one does.
That's not the case. And probably there was about a 70% failure. But the thing is, you get up and you keep going and you never stop. And I think that's a big difference between a lot of people that maybe, even if we're talking about investing in, say you've got a full-time job and you want to start investing in something to build wealth. And people have said, well, real estate's good, rental real estate is good. And you go out and you buy one piece of property and you don't hit a home run, it's a bad deal. And you wind up going belly up on your very first time out of the gate. A lot of people will stop and quit and say, no, I did that once. There's no money in real estate. Oh my God.
Right.
I have seen that. Well, that was never me. I don't know why. I just, I had some really good mentors beginning before college, but definitely in college. I have a lot of stories about some people that I met, like Sam Walton and Ross Perot. This is going way back. Okay. A lot of young people don't know some of these names. So, those people, I made an attempt to associate myself at an early age with the people that I saw were succeeding. I didn't understand how they were succeeding, but you get it.
Surrounding yourself.
Yeah, you surround yourself and you get little pieces of information. When you're having lunch with Ross Perot on one side and Sam Walton on the other side, and we're just talking, and I mean, and there's actually a photograph or two with that, and you hang on to those things, but you hang on to the words that they said, and then you bounce on to the next one, into the next one, and you see similarities, and I think you
recognize the patterns.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I believe it or not, our no longer President Trump. I will just tell a very small story that he told me. He said, "You do this." And I stretch it a little bit because I want to put emphasis on it, because I've said this over and over and over again. One of President Donald Trump's words that meant most to me is he said, again, I stretch it because I'm going to put emphasis on it. He says, "You never, ever, ever, you never, ever, ever, do you ever quit, ever, never." And that's what it takes.
Those are smart.
We'll be back in a moment.
Isla Mujeres is a Caribbean jewel off the coast of Cancun. Castilito del Caribe warmly invites you to enjoy our spectacular oceanfront villa located in the heart of El Centro and a short walk to Playa Norte, which is ranked one of the top 10 beaches in the world. With an ocean view of crystal clear turquoise waters overlooking both the Caribbean and Cancun city skyline, we offer a fabulous location for you to enjoy all the peace and tranquility you're looking for on vacation, while also taking in all the excitement the island has to offer, with activities either in walking distance or a golf cart day excursion away. Please visit CastilitoCaribe.com, www.CastilitoCaribe.com. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Is it time to go? Are you starved for adventure and new experiences? Do you feel like you're slowly dying inside, just a little, day by day? Afraid of having to work forever with never enough money to retire or live the life you have always imagined? Life doesn't have to be that way. Instead, imagine waking up in paradise every day saying, "Pinch me, is this real?" Join me for How to Retire Overseas on a Shoestring Budget. In this free live workshop, you'll walk away with your own custom roadmap to a dream life in paradise without breaking the bank. Register for our next free workshop at paradiseroadmap.com. Welcome back to the Overseas Life Redesign podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and we invite you to subscribe if you like what you hear.
You cannot quit. You cannot stop just because your first try out of the gate was a failure, or maybe it wasn't quite as good as you thought it was, or the market's changed, or there's a COVID.
Or
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is.
Walk away from a marriage with nothing.
That's right. Don't stop.
You want to talk about that? You had mentioned that before
my
we
first
started
marriage.
recording.
Yeah.
And you said you started over.
I did.
With nothing.
Yeah,
and were able to rebuild very quickly.
Yeah.
Is that you attribute that to the education that you gave yourself, basically the experience? Tell me a little bit about that.
By the time I was 20 years old, you couldn't stop me. Obviously, there's good things and bad things about that. At 20 years old and at 58 years old, I wasn't wise enough, or my hearing wasn't as good as it should have been, even all those years, to when someone in my family probably said something to me about, are you taking care of the household chores like you should be? Are you taking care of your Wi-Fi? If it was said, I never heard it. So it happened more than once, meaning I had more than one wife. So yes, Dawn's talking about my first wife. I think we divorced when I was like 31, maybe, right in that area. And I felt I was in business. I felt real guilty about it. And I did. I gave her everything. Whatever we had, she had. And, even cashed out life insurance policies, and it's yours. Now we were still building a wealth, so it wasn't near what it is today. But this is what I knew, and this will sound a little bit egotistical, and it's not meant to be. I knew, because I owned several different properties by that time. I knew whatever we had built at that time. Number one, I knew I did it. And again, this is not egotistical. But more importantly, knowing that it was me that built what we had, whatever it was at that particular time, I knew that I could do it again, and I could do it again much quicker, because I don't have to make all those stupid mistakes that you make at 18, 19, 20, 21, all the way to 30. You try not to, and I didn't make very many of them because I learn. I do learn. I may not be the sharpest fence post in the ranch, but I can learn some things. But not as quickly about marriage and taking care of family. That's where I have a big failure. I'm probably not going to get a chance to repair that or fix that.
I don't know. There's still time.
We'll see. But I do know how to help other people create wealth and build wealth. And it's not about making money, it's about building wealth. And those two things are really, they're hardly even connected. And then when I started traveling and speaking, it was about building wealth. It was prefaced on agriculture, because most of my writings at that time was about agriculture, but it was dealing with agriculture as real estate, as an investment, and the other assets as an investment, and how they can return for you. So I hope that I've helped some young people along the way during those years. Consequently, agriculture has gotten really tough. Yeah. But I don't think, and I'm not one to say, well, yeah, things are really hard today and it's tough. I don't really fall for that, because I would never, if I was 35, 39 years old again, you couldn't stop me from doing it. COVID would not stop me. And just like the equities, I mean, so my equities have done really good during COVID. Those companies that I bought into, those are businesses, just not the same kind of businesses I had. Those businesses did really well too. Some of those guys that are multi millionaires are billionaires now.
Yeah.
They didn't just crumble because something looked really bad in the environment, and it was really bad. There's always little cracks. There's always little pieces of daylight. All you got to do is look for that daylight and then wiggle in there and make that crack a big opening and never stop.
So let's see if we can take that down to a more personal level. So you've obviously done well for yourself. You've been at a stage where, basically walked away from everything and started over again at 30. But what would you say to somebody that maybe is facing a financial ruin situation at 50 or 60 years old, and especially in this environment where everything's so high and inflated? Like, where, wave my magic wand and you got to rebuild. What advice would you give to someone that is,
I'm really,
I know it, and we'll give your legal disclaimer here that we're not giving financial advice here.
That's for sure. Yeah. That's the thing is, for me, it's a really easy question. Okay. And it's really the same answer I give a lot of times on similar questions. And it's asked about, there's a response that other people have given, that I also steal their thoughts also. You're going to be 60, 70, 80, in relation to education. You can be 80 years old and have an education, or you can be 80 years old and have no education. Now, and I'm not saying that education, as far as diplomas and such, is a key to assure you of success in the financial world, because it's not. However, it probably has never hurt anybody either. So you can be 60, 70, 80, or 90, or 100. You can have wealth and you can have education, or you can have no education and you can have no wealth. So you decide, just because you're 56, just because you're 76, are you going to stop wanting to be creative in this world just because of a certain age? I mean, there's mornings that I wake up and I look in that mirror and I see this old man that's not the old man that I am, but I see that guy. I'm not going to stop. Now, I'm never going to not be in business in equities and other markets, but I'm not going to be, because of the reasons that I've already given, in owning a small business anymore. I'm never going to do that. But I am not. That doesn't mean I have ever stopped learning, ever. And I'm never going to stop building wealth. And I don't want to brag about it, but I've doubled my wealth since I decided to retire. And it wasn't because I'm so smart. It's just that I didn't stop. Remember, never, ever, 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 ever stop, ever. I don't care what the age is. I will never stop. And if for some reason I wake up in the morning and the world's upside down and all of my investments have gone flat, I'll just start again. I will not stop.
So from a practical standpoint, what would you do? Like
do the same thing I've always done. I'd go out there and find a piece of property. I'll start with scratch one, but it wouldn't take me as long, just like the second time I did it. And that's the thing
So you're saying real estate would be the foundation?
Real estate, you know what, the thing about, there are people that make money in every industry, and there are people that lose money in every industry. There are people that have, in companies that make and sell shoes and make billions of dollars, and there's companies that make and sell shoes and go bankrupt.
Right.
And whether we're talking shoes or appliances or I don't care. It doesn't matter what. In real estate also, it isn't about the product. It's about you. So if it's me or if it's anybody else, learn the field that you're in. Learn, and when I say field that you're in, I mean the dollars and cents. I mean, you've got to know how to read a financial statement. You've got to be, because probably at some point in time, you're going to have to scale up, meaning one, renting your bedroom out. If you've got a house, even if your house is a rental house and you've got an extra bedroom, renting that one bedroom out is not going to create a whole lot of wealth. One of the ways that we describe it is scale up. How do you scale up that bedroom? Well, believe me, I've seen people do this. they rent out both bedrooms, including their own bedroom. And I actually had an Airbnb, and I did that. Actually, I moved out into for a weekend, I moved out into a camper for the weekend so I could rent out my bedroom. And I, quite frankly, I didn't have to have the money. I just did it because that's what my mind thinks. So you have to scale up. And you
So get creative, really, is what I'm getting from
Yeah,
you.
that's
Is
creative.
just get creative and figure out like what
but
you have to work with.
But you can't stop with renting one bedroom. And us that have been in the real estate business, whether it's agriculture or whether it's duplexes or condominiums, multifamily units, we start thinking. It doesn't take long before we start thinking, and that's why where my mind goes. My mind goes to bedrooms. Well, there's so many bedrooms that requires, if you're creating a 10% margin on each bedroom, how many bedrooms do I have till I can make $100,000 a year? That doesn't. You don't have to be a mathematician to figure that out. You can figure it out.
But it's simple math.
It's very
math,
simple,
right?
Accounting is very simple. Reading financial statements is very simple, but you're typically not born with that knowledge, so you have to learn it. You have to learn along the way, and it does get more complicated. So at some point in time, this is where I was actually going with this conversation. You're going to have to, during this scaling up process, and if you're a working class person like most of my people are, my friends, my family, meaning you don't have a rich uncle to go get money from, you're going to have to talk to a banker, and the way that banker reads you, your ability, your credibility to that banker, how he sees you and how you communicate with him, meaning your knowledge on finances and economics and the industry that you're talking about borrowing money for, that determines, not necessarily your experience and success at it, that determines whether he's going to give you that very first loan. And that very first loan is sometimes the hardest one to get. And I will promise you, after that point, it gets easier and easier and easier and easier. And pretty soon, the banker just says, "Oh, it's Cliff Holmes. He knows what he's doing. Give it to him." That is taking that confidence that you have in yourself. And we talked about having employees and scaling up. You have to transfer. You get to the point where you can transfer your confidence and where other people are going to have confidence in you. If you've got 35 people working for you and they think you're a loser, good luck with that. Yeah. If you people that work for you, you've got to have confidence in you. Your banker he works for you. Your accountant works for you. Your attorney he's your employee. You don't work for him. Right. If you don't like him, leave. There's 100,000 other attorneys, 100,000 other bankers, but you build that confidence in yourself and transfer it to the people around you, and then they help scale up the bedrooms for you. It doesn't mean it ever gets easy, and it probably never gets easier than it was the first time, but you never, ever, 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 ever quit. Never.
Well, and it's, goes back to what you're talking about, surrounding yourself with the right people that have the right way of thinking, rather than thinking, oh, woe is me, I don't know what to do. I mean, I was even thinking about when we first moved to the island here, one of our property management company that we had at the time, he started out renting doing long-term leases, and then dolling up the properties and turning them into vacation rentals. And so it was, and a lot of people have done that in Airbnbs in the States as well. So this idea that, oh, well, I've lost everything and I don't have any money, there's always ways, right, that you can still build that wealth, that income and that wealth without having those resources. That's right. And I don't know if you meant to, but you jogged a memory of mine. And this is something I talked about when I used to talk about when I used to give a lot of presentations, and there's some disagreement among especially the younger crowds of today and what I'm going to tell you in this. I believe that consumer debt is an absolute trap, and I think it's a complete it's unnecessary. And I basically never had any consumer debt once I realized what it was all about. Yeah, and it was at a very young age. I might not even been 20 years old. Meaning, if I owned something, I owned it. Unless it produced money,
And and a lot of people might not understand what I'm talking about. I can borrow money to buy a rental house.
The good debt versus bad debt.
That's right. And there's no amount of consumer debt that I can classify as good. But there is an unlimited amount of non-consumer debt that is all good. It can be all good.
Right.
And that, if you've got one of the problems that I'm seeing with people that want to invest in real estate, typically they've got a job. Maybe the guy and the husband and wife both have jobs that make a pretty good salary, and every time they get a raise, they sell their house and buy a more expensive house and a more expensive car. That's all consumer debt. They actually have very little disposable income than 5 years ago when they're making a third of what they're making now.
Right.
But if they would just say stop and live within their means and actually go back, and that's really hard. When you keep buying when your house gets about every 3 years, you buy another $50,000 house and another $20,000 a car, meaning that the car is worth more than that.
Right.
Then you can drive a Honda a long time if you want
That's
to.
right.
Okay. And and you can pay cash more than likely for that Honda. But if you want to drive I drive an Infiniti, but I still paid cash for it. Yeah. But there's people that are 22 years old driving a $65,000 Infiniti or a Mercedes or a BMW, whatever, living in a house that's I probably never lived in that value of a house. And they don't have any disposable income. Wow. And they're never going to have any wealth.
The food lines that we saw during COVID, and there's $50,000-$60,000 vehicles.
Oh yeah,
people are in line to get free food.
Something that I remember seeing, and I definitely don't want to think, because I am there's not a racist piece of skin on my body at all. Even before everybody started talking about racism, it was just a stupid thing to me. There's no racism exists in me. But there's something that I noticed about, and it's just because of where I was living. It's in my hometown, Springfield, Missouri, which is known for cashew chicken. They say that's where cashew chicken was invented. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's what everybody said growing up. And this is what I noticed, and I was a teenager when I noticed this, and probably very few teenagers would notice this. I would see, someone from the Asian community, and it's a small community, so we would see this happen. They would come in. And it could have been Asian. It could have been Mexican. It could have been French. It didn't matter. It just happened to be Asian that I happened to see this. And Springfield is known for Chinese chicken. Well, that doesn't mean they're Chinese. It's just kind of a term that we use. And I would see this Asian person, usually a family, a small young family, and they would come in. I see this happen so many times in that community. And since then, as an adult, an older adult, I've seen it happen all over the world, really, where I travel. I would see this young family, very young family, even with one or two children, and they were obviously had no money, and they were not driving a BMW, okay? And somehow, I don't know how they would do this, before they bought a house or a car, they would somehow, probably a rent or a lease the first time, acquire the rights to open up a very small Chinese restaurant. I mean, hand to mouth, okay? And because I saw it with my own eyes, even though it was not a legal thing to do, they lived in the back of that restaurant. And they built that restaurant. And they built the business from scratch. It was an empty building when they moved in. And they would build that small business. And we'd talk about scaling up. And like within just a couple of years, you could see that every penny that they made, it looked like they put it right back into business. And then all of a sudden, whatever the name of that little restaurant was on the other side of town, they would open up another one. And within 10 years, they'd have them all over town. These little bitty, still pretty small, but I don't know for sure, but I'm sure by then they bought themselves a nice home and maybe a nice car. That's not the typical American way. We get out of college, start making this money. The first thing we do is buy a car and then a house, and we don't have any disposable income to invest with.
Yeah, different mentality.
That is like that clicked with me.
Yeah.
So I was against, in my own family, which did cause some problems, against having consumer debt. I just never did have it.
Yeah, well, that's a good addiction not to have, right?
I think so, yeah. I will make one caveat. The first house that I bought was where I lived. I had to borrow the money to buy it. But later, actually, that house turned into a rental. Mm-hmm. So I think from that point forward, pretty much everything, every time I borrowed money, it had to have the potential to make money, earn money.
Well, it sounds like you have the golden touch, but I know there was a lot of work that went into it. So bravo. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about what your life has been like since you retired, and kind of.
Well, for the first time, because I got married very young, right when I went to college, and I've been married almost practically every day since then until my last wife left. That was 5 years ago. I have been alone for 5 years. I have been traveling the last 2.5 or so, international traveling for the most part. I never stopped. That was something that I had kind of dreamed of doing that I never thought I could do because I was in business all those years. And those 3 years that I spent walking around the house on the ranch trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, that kept coming back into my head. I think I want to travel, and that kind of was a light beam way out there that said, okay, that's where I'm going. I can see the light, I'm going to travel. And that moved me, that motivated me partially to sell everything I had. And by the next weekend after closing, I was gone. And I woke up in Belize. And I went south from there. And I am very happy the first couple of years, the route that I took, which is I'm not afraid of taking the unorthodox route. I took the route of a backpacker in Latin America from hostel to hostel, and I went all the way to Southeast Asia. And the learning experience from those that were much more experienced at doing that, only they were doing it in their 20s. I'm 60, doing it, which after a while I got really comfortable with it, and I'm completely comfortable with it now. In fact, even when I stay mostly in Airbnbs now, I still travel with only a backpack. And occasionally I will hop into a hostel for a week because I know what goes on there. It's exciting. They know where all the best places to be, where the food is, and no matter how much money I have, I am always going to be a penny pincher. I cannot stop.
That's how you keep it, right?
That's right.
Is not being.
But I will tell you that one thing about that, and it is kind of funny because it's come to surface more than once. Yes, I like the hostel traveling and backpacking and riding the chicken buses across Latin America. Now in Mexico, actually, most of them have been replaced with ADO air-conditioned buses.
Nice,
so it's really nice.
Coaches, right?
But there's a difference now when I travel. I can ride a chicken bus, and I can stay at a hostel for a month or two, traveling in different countries. But what I do know is now, and I've done this on occasion, and I will never stop. After a month or two, if I feel like it, which is different than most of the kids that are actually traveling to hostel, I can get a penthouse in a Hyatt anytime I want.
Right.
And I do. So I
go to the 5-star all-inclusive
right.
and
spend a
hang
couple
out
days
for a little while.
Yep, get my suds on and then go back to the hostel again. So that's the difference. Yeah.
So you also told me that you spent some time in Myanmar.
Yeah, I've been all over Southeast Asia. Yeah, I don't know how much detail you want on that.
Yeah, well, we
oh my gosh,
a bit more time, so well,
I have a friend back in Missouri that's about my age that does some really good humanitarian work in some of the orphanages in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, and I know it as Burma, that they had a name change. So I told my friend Ray, who is third generation in this humanitarian project in Myanmar. I'd always told him for years, someday I'm going to retire. Someday I'm going to retire. Let me know. I'll come help you. At least help with what I think I can do for you guys in Southeast Asia on one of your trips. He makes an annual trip there. He works all year long. His family works all year long to collect what money they can, and then they do what projects they can at the orphanages, like dig wells and things like that. Whatever they do. A lot of different projects over the years. And his father's actually a retired neurosurgeon. And I got to see it. They actually built a hospital, a clinic over there years and years and years ago. So this is a
long time project.
Long project. And what do you know? I'm traveling in Latin America, and I get a message from Ray, something like, "Cliff, you said you wanted to come. I'm going to be there in 3 days. You want to meet me there?" Okay, Ray, I guess. So I dropped everything I was doing, and next thing I knew, I'm in Southeast Asia. And it was, I have to be careful what details I give, not because it's a secret, because I was moved with the stuff that Ray does in the orphanages. That is just the humanitarian work. It changed me forever. And I told Dawn a little bit about this last time we spoke, that when Ray's project was over, for him to come back to the States and go back to work to make money again for the next year's project, I stayed in Southeast Asia and traveled all over Southeast Asia. And one of the places that I traveled to was Cambodia, and I visited the killing fields. So I went from these orphanages of kids with missing arms and legs and just basically starvation. I guess I didn't get enough. Then I went to the killing fields in Cambodia, and it was like jabbing a knife in my heart. And it changed me. That trip to Southeast Asia, a lot has changed my perspective these last 5 years. But Southeast Asia and those events that were not just a little bit heart reckoning, they destroyed whatever evil I think I had in my heart and replaced it with, okay, it's time for you to do something good for a while. So I've been doing a little bit more and a little bit more. I'm searching for new things. I met some incredible people in Ray's organization from Australia. We've just recently been talking about what I've got a new book coming out, which you haven't asked about that.
Yeah.
So I've got a new book coming out.
That's next.
And one of my friends from Australia, I met these really great nurses from Australia that were also and we kind of joined forces when we were in Myanmar. And I made a comment about my new book coming out, and within minutes she comes back with this message. She's actually South African, but she's living in Australia. She says, "What about doing because I made a comment. In my new book, I'm not out there to make money off my new book. I'm just doing it for fun. I do a little bit of drawing and art. I do that for fun. Everything I do is for fun now." And she said, "What about doing donating? We'll help promote your book, and you'll donate part of that money for our projects in Myanmar." I said, "That's a wonderful idea. I never thought about that." So I'm wanting to do more and more things like that. It's not going to be anything grand because I'm not a grand person, but I want to. My time on this earth has slowly, finally taught me something, and definitely my Southeast Asia trip and the people that I met there have taught me that I can actually put something back in, not just take it out all the time. So I don't have, that's a continued story because I don't know where it's going to go, but it is in the process. And I'm looking for those things, and I am participating in other projects, very small projects. My part of it's small anyway. So yes, I don't want to talk too much about it because I will start crying. I will.
Wow. So it really did have a huge impact on you.
I can't describe it.
Yeah.
It's too, and I don't want to talk about it now.
Sure. Well, this has been awesome. I know we could be here for hours and talk about all kinds of things, but I'm so excited for you and this new chapter of your life and,
Thanks,
and
Tom.
the
Appreciate
direction. And I'm so glad we had an opportunity to meet. Before we wrap up, is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to?
Oh my gosh, 63 years of life. We couldn't cover it.
Sort of, Cliff's last famous words. If there's anything you.
I know that one of the things that Dawn is involved with, I'm sure she's involved in a lot of things, is real estate, investing in different places, and however one chooses to build wealth, I think that it's that real estate itself, and that's a very broad category. It's so broad. I think that it's hard to go wrong, and just never, ever, 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 ever quit, and never quit, ever. It'll come, and real estate's a good place. It really is.
Great. That was awesome. That's a good ending. So Well, cool. Well, to be continued. Maybe
Okay.
We'll do a follow-up interview after the book's published and
Sure.
catch up with you down the road.
Sounds good.
This episode of the Overseas Life Redesign podcast was brought to you by our sponsors. Thanks for tuning in. Did you love this episode of the Overseas Life Redesign podcast? Then please subscribe to our show and leave us a nice review. It's very much appreciated. We invite you to visit paradiseroadmap.com and register for our upcoming free live workshop, How to Retire Overseas on a Shoestring Budget. We'd also love for you to become part of our Live and Earn in Paradise Facebook group. Thanks for listening.